أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدنا ومولانا علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ أخذ ربك من بني آدم من ظهورهم ذريتهم وأشهدهم على أنفسهم ألست بربكم قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On this very blessed day, I would like to offer and wish my wholehearted congratulations on the birth of the Imam of all creation, humankind, jinnkind, and other. One who, in our hadith it's narrated, was among the first to worship Allah Ta'ala and even instructed the angels in their worship, and one who will have a pivotal role in the next world and in the Qiyamah. Inshallah, may we all be blessed with his shafa'ah. So, Mubarak on the birth of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Now, if we wish to try to encapsulate the commander of the faithful alayhi salam, to describe who he was, we would not only be here all night, we would be here for a very, very long time, perhaps even until the Qiyamah itself. However, there are certain things that we oftentimes mention about him, particularly on occasions like this. Number one, that his entire life was in the context of the worship of Allah Ta'ala, and in particular the version of that religion, or one can say to the final expression of that religion brought by the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That is to say, he was born in the house of Allah and also left this world in a house of Allah. I would like to focus on the beginning part today, which is from infancy, from his very first moments, he was associated with the worship of Allah, both personally but also formally. And the commander of the faithful, alayhi salam, is also renowned for being the first male to convert to Islam. And not only was he the first male, but he was also quite young, that is to say, 10 years old. Now, I do not wish to cause a riot or get any complaints. I am not at all suggesting that he converted to Islam, that he didn't believe and then he picked up belief in Islam. I think you would find very few people who call themselves Shia who say, yes, we believe Imam Ali converted to Islam at the age of 10. Rather, we believe that he had this very intimate knowledge of Allah Ta'ala even before he came into this world. And simply at this particular time, he formally gave his allegiance to the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So one can say it was a formal giving of allegiance to the prophetic mission. Now I'd like to pause here. And I would like to point out the obvious, that this is something he did at a fairly young age. Is this simply because he was very exceptional, which obviously he was? I would not at all challenge that. He is very unique and very exceptional. And is this why he could begin practicing Islam at a very young age, to the point where we see that he and Hazrat Khadija and the Holy Prophet, peace be upon all of them, were the first ones to actually do the formal prayers in the Holy Kaaba. Right? We've heard the narrations where people looked at them in astonishment. They saw them going like this. They said, what are these three people doing? You know, we see this Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wa We see Khadija, and we see this Ali ibn Abi Talib, who at the time was a child. What are they doing? And the narrator was told they are worshipping Allah Ta'ala, that this man says he is a prophet and there is one Allah, and this is how they pray. So was he able to have this immense devotion to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his family, at this young age, simply because he was Imam Ali, and Imam Ali can do virtually anything? Or is this a capacity that other children have as well? For instance, that young lady right there, or perhaps that young man right there, or some of these young ladies right over here, and the rest of you as well. I'm not trying to ignore any young people in here. Is this a special capacity that Amir al-Mu'mineen had to worship Allah Ta'ala sincerely and with full conviction in childhood? Or is this something we can and should expect from our youth as well? This is what I would like to look at today. And I'm going to, inshallah, look at this from two directions. One of them is textual or scriptural. That is to say, what is in some of our texts. I do not expect that to be new information. Inshallah, maybe we can look at it in a couple new angles, but I expect that these ideas should be ideas that all of us are, or most of us are familiar with. The other half may be new to some of us and may not be new to some of us. And that is what scientific research says about the capacity of young people to know and understand God. Is it the case that young people, such as those, simply adopt religious belief because they are copying their elders and they're being well indoctrinated into what we believe? Or is it that this actually comes from themselves naturally and perhaps just with a minimal amount of assistance from the adult world, they're able to express and verbalize belief in God or belief in whatever religious system they happen to be around? So, inshallah, we'll begin with the first one, looking at some of the scriptural elements of this question. Now, if the idea of the fitrah came to your mind when I brought up this question, well, that's a very obvious thing. And there's essentially two aspects to how we can look at the Quranic description of it. The first is what is known as the mithaq, or the taking of a covenant before Allah Ta'ala. And this is a very evocative verse of the Holy Qur'an, which says that Allah Ta'ala has taken, or we have borne witness to Allah Ta'ala. You'll notice the Eid in that verse. It does indicate that this is something that has happened. So we have borne witness to Allah Ta'ala that He is our Lord. And we have borne witness rather strongly to Allah Ta'ala that He is our Lord. And the ayah continues, lest we say before Allah Ta'ala that we weren't thinking about this. We were ghafilin. We didn't know about Allah. We were heedless. And the next ayah, I think, is extremely important with respect to this idea, because essentially it is saying even if our forefathers were mushrikeen, so polytheists, still it's not an excuse before Allah to say, well, I was just simply following my polytheistic followers, because all of us at some point or another in our history, in spiritual cosmology, have given this oath of allegiance before Allah Ta'ala. And this is the ayah. So, who remembers giving an oath to Allah Ta'ala, bearing witness that He is our Lord? And in our hadith, it also says that we gave allegiance to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and we gave allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Salawat. And I do want to emphasize on the point that this is all of creation. So it's not only the Shia or even certain sects of the Shia or the Muslims who have given allegiance to the commander of the faithful, according to what is in our narrations. And I do believe these narrations. This is something that all human beings bore witness to at some point before we came into this world, whether you look at that as being chronologically before this world or existentially in some matter. The point is that it is something that the human being has done on one level or another innately, even though none of us seem to remember it. And that's also mentioned in narrations too. So what this actually means has two interpretations among Shi'i scholars. There is actually a fair amount of disagreement about this. There is what one can call the rationalist view, and that is this ayah is referring to an innate capacity within the human being to recognize Allah Ta'ala. So one can say it's referring to the fitrah, or perhaps the cognitive ability of the human being to acknowledge Allah Ta'ala. Of course, this is a possibility, and this is actually something we will be looking at. The other interpretation, which you're probably familiar with, is one that is very heavily reinforced by our hadith, and that is that this was actually an oath that was taken in a realm of pre-creation called the al-dharr, also al-mithaq, or you can say the world of particles. And we do have a lot of ahadith about what happened in that world of pre-creation. Among the things that it is narrated that happened is all of human beings were taken out in a sort of proto-form. So we didn't have souls, we didn't have the intellect, but according to ahadith, we had what was necessary for us to recognize Allah Ta'ala and bear witness to Him, as if we were particles. So those you can imagine are the particles of human beings, all taken out and displayed to Adam alayhi salam as well. And at that point, we bear witness in this particle form to the oneness of Allah and also wilayah. Now, one might ask, because we have so many narrations on this, why is it that some of our scholars don't accept it? It's because, first of all, some of these narrations are contradictory. Some people have some doubts about some of the narrators. And in some narrations, there are some ideas which one could say come across as un-Quranic, Allahu Alam. However, there's no problem if someone considers this to be an interpretation of the ayah. And in the end, for our purposes, it doesn't matter. For our purposes today, what matters is that all human beings, in one way or another, have, as this ayah said, borne witness to Allah Ta'ala, or have the capacity to do so, and are expected by the divine to do so, and will be held accountable in the next world for that. That falls under the category of ramifications. Now, you'll notice in all of this, I've been using phrases such as all human beings. And indeed, even if we just want to talk about Imam Ali, alayhi salam, one of the things you hear constantly emphasized about him is his essential humanity and human focus, right? You very rarely hear people talking about him with respect to a tribe or a sect. Instead, there is this sense that he is a gift to all humanity, a person for all humanity. Similarly, the Holy Qur'an also has this humanistic focus in the sense of humanistic being with respect to all human beings for all time, all places. It's not tribal, it's not sectarian, it's not group-oriented. And definitely the ayah of the mithaq is also something which does encompass all human beings. And what we're going to talk about, inshallah, with respect to religion and cognitive psychology is obviously also something which is cross-cultural and cross-religious as well. It has to do with the innate nature of the human being. So this is in essence our approach to religion. Now you'll see there's a picture up there. I just wanted to insert this small point in here. Many people really like this picture and love to share it on social networking platforms such as Facebook and Twitter and so forth. I dislike this picture immensely. Why do I dislike the picture? I am going to tell you. I feel that a picture like this reinforces the view that religion is just another form of tribalism. That is to say, it is something inherited. So for example, if I have one parent who's from I don't know, China, and one parent who's from England, the child might say, I'm half English, half Chinese, because these are ethnic groups or national groups. Okay, so if you have a child that's one parent is Sunni and one parent is Shi'i, the child does not come out Sushi, because this is not what the Holy Qur'an says about belief. If you think about that ayah that we were just looking at, Allah is saying that you bear witness to me regardless of who your parents were or what they believed, and there's no excuse. So I'm not going to use this as a platform to argue about Sunni versus Shi'i, but I'm going to say that this is very strongly ingrained in our subconsciousnesses, that religion is something which is inherited and tribal, and obviously children do very frequently follow in their parents' footsteps with respect to religious practice, which is something we'll look at as well. But before Allah, religion is something different. And even when we look at Imam Ali, alayhi salam, when we look at how Imam Ali formally converted to Islam, so he formally gives his allegiance to Islam. Thank you. And when he formally gives his allegiance to Islam, does he ask his father for permission? Abu Talib. Okay, no. No, he does not. What is quoted from him, and this is in the Sunni Sirah, incidentally, he says that Allah did not ask Abu Talib permission to create me, so I should not ask Allah permission to worship him. Now, of course, God forbid, he's not being disrespectful to his father, but one can say one of the revolutions of Islam, and even of Christianity, is that religion is something that transcends family ties. So it's not about simply following along what the tribe does or nowadays the nation state does. Thank you. But instead, it is an individual responsibility before Allah Ta'ala. And also something innate, which is something we will get on with, inshallah. And then, of course, there is the general concept of the fitrah, which most of us are familiar with. The idea that Allah Ta'ala has granted us an innate nature which recognizes and worships Him. I'm just going to pick up on one word in that ayah, Hanif. What does Hanif, what did the people called Hanif worship in the Arabian Peninsula? Okay, pure monotheism. So this ayah is a reminder that the worship of Allah, or the fitrah, is pure unadulterated monotheism, and this is what the human being is designed for. We have a number of ahadith about the concept of the fitrah. These are a couple you're probably familiar with. The famous one, that all human beings are born with this essential monotheism in our human natures. However, it is the parents who make children into different religions. We have other versions of this narration with a few other religions mentioned. But the idea being that the cultural environment will shape someone towards a certain religious belief. Let's hold that idea somewhere in our minds. And the other, that this fitrah is a proof of Allah Ta'ala. So the last ayah was mentioning that we have borne witness to Allah Ta'ala, and our inner natures also lead us towards monotheism, and this is mentioned in some of our narrations as part of the way in which we recognize Allah Ta'ala. Most of us are familiar with this idea in an Islamic context. I chanced across this quotation by a Christian Protestant theologian, and I just found it interesting insofar as it expresses the same idea, which is a reminder that we're not the only people to have acknowledged that the human being does have an inherent tendency towards the divine. So with that in mind, I'd like to look at the second approach, since we had two approaches. And that is, scientifically speaking, what have people found out in the past century plus about religion and child psychology. Because the idea was advanced about 100 years ago by a very famous child psychologist that children don't really believe in God, and they just believe God is a big person and he makes things and he's powerful like mommy and daddy are powerful, and kids are basically just brainwashed or indoctrinated. And we hear this a lot today, right? We hear sometimes the idea that teaching religion is child abuse and you shouldn't teach religion to children, right? You've seen the advertisements in some places, especially in Europe is known for being particularly secular in the world. And so sometimes these ideas are circulated. However, subsequent to that, there has been a fair amount of research into how children comprehend religion or the spiritual. And there's a growing body of research in this. I'm going to focus just on one book today. It's called Born Believers by a researcher who has done decades of research on this named Justin Barrett. He does appear to be Protestant Christian in persuasion. However, one thing about his book is he's very successful at navigating the academic world, and he doesn't impose his religious views on people. He just gives the results of his findings. If you are interested in reading this book, you can get it online. I have it on my phone. It is a good read. If you're not really at a point where you're willing to commit to reading another book in life, he has some lectures online about this book and about another well-known book of his about psychology and belief in God, and they're also good listens. What are some features of this book that I find worthwhile? One of them is that, yes, thank you. One of them is that the studies he does on children and conceptions of God are cross-cultural and cross-religious, including in places where adherence to Abrahamic faiths is not the norm. So, for example, there are certain results which are supported by studies in America and in China. So you're dealing with very different cultural concepts, which supports the idea that these are natural elements of how children think and are not just simply aspects of what they've learned from their environment. And really, there is quite a range of cultural contexts where these studies take place. There's one experiment he does, which is also replicated among a pre-industrialized tribal people. So there's really a broad spectrum. The main point of the book, and I'll bring up some ideas that he discusses is whether or not children do have any inclination to believe in God or in supernatural beings, and how that works out cross-culturally. Another very good point in this book is that he cites other researchers who've done research in this subject area as well. So I would recommend reading it, and I also have to credit one of our graduates from Islamic College, mashallah, who's also now a sheikh, mashallah, who encouraged me to read the book, and so now I can share the book with all of you as well. So let's have another salawat. So what are some of the main ideas here? This is a list of some of the main ideas which we are going to look at. So if some of these are new, you can puzzle over what they might be. Okay, one of his main contentions is that children's brains, or I should say children, human beings, come into the world with what he calls a God-shaped hole in the brain. Now, the idea behind that, which anyone who studied psychology or education should be familiar with, is that when we are born, we have certain, we're primed to learn certain things, and many of these actually correspond to what we study in school. So, for example, our brains are designed to do basic mathematics and logical reasoning. This is something that we have a facility for, and we learn very quickly. In fact, I think even some primates can handle, they'll respond to basic mathematical conflicts. It's something that works very well. Or language. A child without any sort of exceptional difficulties is primed to learn at least one spoken language or more than one spoken language. This is normal and it is expected. Obviously a child doesn't come into the world speaking a particular language, but it's got a language slot available in its brain and it looks to fill the language slot. And many other things too. Walking, for example. Again, unless there is an exceptional issue, a child is primed to learn how to walk. And these are all things that assist us throughout our lives. Conversely, there are certain things we learn and do that our brains are not naturally set up for. Has anyone tried multidimensional calculus? Yeah, some of you have. Or multidimensional mathematics in general. I mean, above 3 dimensions. Is it something that's conceptually easy for you to visualize? Say 13-dimensional mathematics. Yeah, no, that's beyond most of us. This is something that our brains are not primed for. And so because it's counterintuitive, you have to work very hard to be able to even try to do it. He contests that religion is not like that. That the human being has a certain slot to put the divine and the supernatural. And from a very early age, say about 3 years old and on, children will try to find things to put into their God slot, so to speak. And one point he makes is that it's a bit like a children's toy. You can imagine perhaps the triangles where you put your mathematics, the squares where you put your language, the circle is where you put your religion. He does point out that children will make an effort to take something from their cultural environment to put into their God slot. He also suggests that certain beliefs fit most naturally. We'll get into what those are in a bit. But if they don't find something that quite fits, they'll try to put something else in there. So, for example, we see today there are many things that people, quote, put in their God slots. For some people in the past century, it was communism or socialism. For some people, it might be nature worship. So there are other things that people try to put in there, albeit he suggests that there are certain things that work best. However, I just want to add as a side point, and this is now slightly off the topic of 3- and 4-year-olds, but this is something which is relevant to us throughout our lives. Although, alhamdulillah, we are very blessed to have the Holy Qur'an and acquaintance with Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, I am not at all entirely certain that our community always is successful in offering the facility necessary to help us fill the God slot. Inshallah, many families and communities are. But I think sometimes there still is a void among some people in our community. Perhaps some of our young or not so young people are oftentimes looking for another way to fill the God slot and sometimes don't always do it in the healthiest of ways. So I think that's something that is important to keep in mind. Okay, back to the subject of children. So we can continue. One of the interesting ideas that he finds, and this is both his work as well as the work of other researchers, is that children seem primed to believe in a supernatural deity, which we can call God, as well as supernatural beings who are not God. Secondary supernatural beings, one can say. And from a very young age, again, they are able to distinguish between the two. Now, at first thought, that might sound heretical because we believe in one God. But of course, that's not the case because even in our theology, we believe in a number of unseen beings, right? What are some unseen beings we have in our theology? Yeah, jinn. What else? Angels. Okay, shaitan. So we do have supernatural invisible beings, or most of the time invisible, at least, as well as Allah. So that is actually something that works for us as well. And he also notes that if children are not given a being, supernatural being or beings to believe in, or even sometimes if they are, they will create them, which most of us are familiar with, I'm sure. Who here had an imaginary friend in childhood? Come on. Okay. Who has an imaginary friend? Does anyone here have an imaginary friend? You? Okay. Would you like to tell? Do you want to tell us about your imaginary friend? Okay. Okay. So that's interesting. Your this being you describe has actually many important qualities, which a researcher might be interested in. It's invisible, and you can speak to it. You have a personal relationship with it. It seems fairly powerful. It can come and go whenever you please or whenever it pleases, and it can punish, right? Was it this the one that punishes the misbehaving children? Okay, and this is also cross-cultural. There is a sense among many children that if they break a certain universal moral code, then some being will punish them. Now, according to children's cultural/religious beliefs or understanding, it may or may not be what we would consider Allah to be doing the punishing, but there is a general sense that there are supernatural beings which enforce a basic internal moral code, such as do not steal, do not lie, do not kill, things which are innate in children. Okay, so one of the concepts he discusses is something which a different researcher described as teleological promiscuity. No, that's not about inappropriate acts, but the idea being teleological, meaning assigning meaning, and promiscuity in a lot of places or in where it doesn't belong, that children will have a sense to try to assign meaning to things that adults don't, and adults certainly are not teaching them about, including things in the natural world, especially things in the natural world, such as rocks. If I asked one of you, why is that rock pointed? What might you say? Why is that rock pointed? This is not a trick question. Okay, Brother Miqdad, why is the rock pointed? Okay, so is it because God sent it down to Earth or maybe beamed it down like in Star Trek or... Okay, so you're going for the erosion theory. The rock may or may not have been pointy originally, but due to natural geological processes, it got pointy. Yeah, this is a common response for adults. If you ask a 4-year-old, why is the rock pointy? They'll come up with different answers. And he found that cross-culturally, children will come up with answers that assign meaning to it and purpose, such as so animals won't sit on the rock and crush it or something. Which to us, it doesn't make any sense, because even if we believe that Allah created it, most of the time we don't take it to that level. But the point is there's an inherent nature in children, again, starting from a very young age, 3 or 4, and carrying on through life, to try to find meaning in the natural world and also in things that happen. Now, obviously, this is atheistic belief, because an atheist, pretty much by definition, does not believe there is meaning to the universe, right? The universe is a random, accidental confluence of atoms. There was a Big Bang by chance, and by chance we're here, even though it's improbable, and so forth. So this is actually not something that is natural. It has to be learned, the idea that there is no meaning to the universe. One of the studies he did was basically, or actually it was a different researcher who did it. They gave kids 2 choices. One kid saying things like, or they're discussing things such as, what is a tiger for? And one kid might say things like, a tiger is for being in the zoo, or a tiger is for eating other animals. So they have a meaning-based view of its existence. The other kid says, no, that's not what it's for. It just is able to do these things. Like, I'm able to put the tiger in a zoo. And they found, by and large, children cross-culturally prefer the explanations of the purpose of a tiger, that gives it a meaning and a reason for being. Interestingly, this is something that does carry on throughout life. And researchers have found that among adults who do not have formal secular education, this carries on throughout life. So there's a sense that things in the natural world exist because they have a purpose. So for example, the sun is there to warm the earth, to grow the crops, and so forth, by and large. They found that for adults who have formal secular educations, who here has a formal secular education? Anyone by any chance? Anyone who doesn't have a secular education? Okay, if we're given time to think about it, we will reject these answers. So if I get an exam paper, I can take it at my leisure. Some people will say no, for example, the fern does not grow in order to provide shade. We'll give another answer, like the fern seed landed and the fern just happened to grow in the forest or something. But they found that if adults are pushed, that you have to answer very quickly, we'll start coming out with answers like that, no matter how much of a secular education we have, thus suggesting that this is something that doesn't actually leave us. We just unlearn the idea that there should be meaning in the universe. And they also found that with people who get Alzheimer's disease, that they also go back to a view that the universe should have meaning. So he suggests that this idea of meaningfulness in creation is something that never quite goes away. I think we should go back. Okay, another question that might come up is, okay, so children seem primed to consider that there is a deity, there are supernatural beings, there is meaning and purposeful creation. Can you go back one? Okay, now you can go forward one. Salawat. One can ask what sort of beliefs about these things either come naturally or are absorbed very naturally. And these are some of the beliefs that he notes. One is that even infants are born with an understanding of causality, that things don't happen for no purpose, and that things can happen by invisible agents. That is, you don't necessarily need to see someone do something in order to understand that something has been done. Okay, the invisible agents comes a bit earlier, but these are also basic aspects of theism, because that's a basic argument for Allah, that the universe did not come from nothing, that someone or something has to have created it. Interestingly, they also found that even when children are raised in heavily secular environments, and even when they're raised in families where evolution is taught as the description of the origin of human beings, so families where belief in God is not taught, and schools where belief in God or creationism are not taught, nonetheless, when given a list of options about how the universe was created or how the world was created, children will unilaterally prefer explanations such as God created it or a supernatural being created it, depending on their cultural context. And they will avoid other non-supernatural answers. So it does seem that belief in a creator and the necessity of a creator is something that happens fairly young. Now he does point out that this, of course, one should not conflate a tendency for something psychologically with the idea that we are created to believe this. In that, of course, as Muslims, we do believe that this is part of the fitrah as the human being, but he does point out that it may be that children are just simply too young to understand a concept such as evolution. And he says he doesn't think children can even grasp the idea before the age of 10 or so, just because it's too far removed from the way the brain works. The idea that a species would change, for example, it takes a certain cognitive load. So he does point that out. Nonetheless, he does find that children do have an innate tendency to believe in a creator and the necessity of a creator for the natural world. And also, it is very difficult to convince children to be atheists. As he points out, there are some children of atheist parents who conducted a very pernicious case of theism, that they just randomly decided to believe in God. And he feels this is because it fit what the God hole in their brain was wanting. Lastly, I just want to mention the last point, because there was this idea circulated some decades ago that children just believe that if children are told about God, they just believe he's a big person or she's a big person who makes everything. But in this book, it describes research that finds that, again, from a very young age, and I am talking about like 4 or 5, young age, children can distinguish between things that God or a supernatural being makes versus things that people make. So if you ask a kid who made this, God or a person, they'll say a person made this. But if you say who made the sun, they won't say that mommy made the sun or daddy made the sun. They'll say that God or deity of choice made the sun. So this distinction, again, is innate. There's this sense that there is a supernatural, invisible, powerful creator who makes natural things. Okay. Lastly, one might ask, what are some of the characteristics of whatever people seem primed to believe? And 2 of these characteristics he notes are immortality and omniscience. Omniscience might be an exaggeration, but knowing everything in accordance with what that might mean to a child. And what he notes about immortality is, in general, children do require some time to learn the concept of mortality. They start out with a good idea of immortality. But it's not something that they lose. The idea that supernatural or spiritual beings or God are immortal. But rather they simply have to learn about the mortality of other things. An interesting result that they came up with, which does reflect the cultural environment, is apparently children who grow up, let me rephrase that, the children they researched who were Christian had a bit of a harder time sorting out the mortality of God once they got older than Jewish children. Which makes sense because of Christian theology and the cross and the resurrection and so forth. These are undoubtedly very complicated ideas for children to work with, whereas Jewish children, like us, we just believe Allah is. And that's that. And they had very little difficulty sorting it out. In any case, these results were for the Christian children. Also, there is a sense that God knows everything and supernatural beings are either all-knowing or a lot-knowing as well. As you mentioned about the being that punishes misbehaving children, you can't hide in the closet and misbehave because the supernatural being or God will see you anyway. This idea that there are beings that can know things that other people won't know. And this also was cross-cultural. So it does seem that this is something that we are also primed for when we come into this world. Okay, next. So what are some things we can draw from this? One, going back to the original question being, was Imam Ali alayhi salam an exception or an example in being able to believe in Allah Ta'ala and believe in the unseen at a very early age? Now, without doubt, I wholeheartedly say he was very exceptional and an exception to many things. But in this regard, I would say he can be a good example. That although I think we're living in an era which doesn't necessarily expect children all the time to have sincere religious belief that comes from themselves or to have religious experiences, this is something which is supported scripturally in the Holy Qur'an and the hadith, and it also is supported by research into children's religious experiences and how the brain works and what the brain is set up to do. And this is something which is traditional in our religious heritage, or in our religious stories, if you will. I mean, for example, when we look at the Quranic portrayal of Nabi Isa, alayhi salam, who obviously is exceptional too, what is the main surprise in the story when he speaks from the cradle? Is it that he believes in Allah, or is it that he's speaking? What's the big deal to the people? Yeah, that's the main surprise. The idea that a child would believe in Allah is sort of glossed over. So it does seem that when you actually look at the narrations we have, there is an expectation that infants will have a stronger memory of the unseen and a connection to Allah, and children will as well. And this is something that is also scientifically supported nowadays. Now, one of the interesting ideas that he does bring up is that there might be a prime age for religious development. You can see a parallel in language, for example. As we all know, that if you learn a language before puberty, basically, you're likely to speak it like a native speaker. The younger, the better. If you learn a language when you are 40 years old, it's very unlikely you will learn to speak like a native speaker, because you've passed the prime age of cognitive development in terms of language acquisition. He suggests that in early childhood, it might actually be the prime age for religious acquisition as well. And so if one, first of all, if one has an interest in teaching children about religion, that one shouldn't just brush off this time as, oh, they're young, they can't understand yet, but one should try to basically communicate religious ideas to young children, but obviously using age-appropriate language. I think the main barrier we have when dealing with young children, and I am actually meaning young, like 5 years old, of course, older children as well. The main barrier is language, that we sometimes use big, complicated words that they don't understand, or complicated sentences that they don't understand, or sometimes the Islamic books we have are not really at a level that they can understand. But conceptually, they should be able to grasp a lot of ideas about Allah Ta'ala and about the unseen and about religion. So we just have to make sure it's communicable to them in a sense that they can understand it. Conversely, there is a suggestion that if children bypass this prime age for religious development, they might try to fill that God slot in some other manner. But that ultimately, as we belief in Allah is something which is, we are ready for and we come out of the womb for. And inshallah, all of our youth, inshallah, can gain a good religious education and follow in the footsteps of Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam. And before we go, since it is almost the 13th of Rajab, I wanted to share a poem by one of our brothers in the United States. He calls it Ali, 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 Ali. A most honored place in history, the bane of lies and tyranny, the mushrik's worst catastrophe, the guardian of prophecy. The guardian of prophecy began his life auspiciously. Born to a holy legacy, the orphaned seal of prophecy was raised by Ali's family, and the Prophet raised the great Ali to be the guard of prophecy. A child of 10 on the Prophet's knee, what the Prophet saw, he too could see. But with pure faith and certainty, he witnessed the reality that Ahmed received prophecy, the first man to witness openly. The hero of the wells, Ali. The hero at Uhud, Ali. The hero at the ditch, Ali. The hero at Hunain, Ali. Wisdom, valor, chivalry. Today recalled to memory the help God gave to prophecy by causing this great man to be. Praise God in all sincerity. Ali, 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 Ali.
We have some time for questions. If there are any questions from either side, starting with the sister side.